Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our study of the Gospel of Mark. We're in Mark chapter 6 now, and this is one of the longer chapters of Mark's Gospel, so there's a lot to cover. I'll do my best to make it through as quickly as possible. We'll cover some sections with a shorter treatment and some other sections with a longer treatment. Mark begins chapter 6 by reintroducing a topic that we've already run across earlier, and that is Jesus being rejected or Jesus being challenged. We've seen that especially with the scribes and the Pharisees, the Herodians, but now we're going to see Jesus's own people, his own village, the village of Nazareth, reject him. So let's read in verse 1. Jesus went from there and came into his hometown, and his apprentices followed him. When Sabbath came, Jesus began to teach in the synagogue. One of the things, I'm just going to stop and make comments at points, but we see here that Jesus actually going to the synagogue to worship on Sabbath. Jesus was a practicing Jew. He believed in worship. He believed in worshiping on the Sabbath. And so he goes in when he's back visiting home, he goes to church. He goes to Sabbath. He goes to synagogue. He worships God. Many who heard him said, "Where did he get these teachings? What is this wisdom, and how has he obtained it? How is he able to work these powerful deeds with his own hands? Is not this the carpenter? Is he not the son of Mary? And are his brothers not James, Joseph, Judas, and Simeon? And are his sisters not here with us?" And they were scandalized because of him. And so his own village looks at him as kind of the boy from the village, and they can't understand how he could possibly be teaching such powerful things, doing such powerful works. And because of that, because of his origin, because of where he came up, and because of familiarity, they trip over him. They're scandalized. Literally, they stumble over him or scandalized by him. And notice here, it doesn't mention his father at all, which makes it, there's that tone of, oh, where does he really come from? Does he really have a father? That kind of thing. Mentions Mary, his brothers, his sisters, but not his father. And then Jesus says this: "A prophet is not without honor except in his homeland, among his own relatives, and in his own house." He was not able to work any miracles there, any miracles there, except to heal a few sick people by laying hands on them. And he marveled at them because of their lack of faith. So Jesus marvels at few people because of their faith, but here he marvels at his whole village because of their lack of faith. And because of their lack of faith, it mentions he's not able to work miracles there. And so that's a story that I think Mark is including in his gospel, because there would have been people that would have come along and said these same things. Well, how could someone be Messiah who came from Nazareth? How could someone be Messiah when he was just a carpenter? We aren't even sure of his lineage. Who was his dad? We know of Mary, and so I'm sure these criticisms were brought against Jesus in the year that Mark wrote, 60 to 65. And so he just puts them out there and shows Jesus' reaction to them. And Jesus was like, well, it takes faith to follow me. But why do these people not have faith? They've heard my teachings, they've seen my miracles. They can accept me on that. Okay, now we get to Jesus sending out the 12, and let's look here in verse 6. Jesus went around teaching in the villages. He called the 12 to him, and he began to send them out 2 by 2. Giving them authority over the unclean spirits, he instructed them to take nothing with them on the road except a staff, no bread, no traveler's pouch, and no money. He instructed them to wear sandals, but not to take a change of clothes. So Jesus is sending them out on a mission. He's saying travel light, and he's not saying that all missionaries everywhere should only take one change of clothes, that kind of thing. But he is saying travel light. And the sense is that travel light so that you can move quickly, get to as many places as possible. And also because wherever you go, the people that are receptive to you are going to show you hospitality, and you can rely on their hospitality. And that's what he says next. He said to them, whenever you come into a house, remain there until you leave that place. If that town does not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake off the dust from under your feet as a testimony against them. They went as heralds of the king, preaching to everyone they met that they must have a change of heart that leads to a change of life, repentance. They cast out many demons. They anointed with oil many who were sick, and the sick were healed. So basically, they continue the ministry of Jesus without Jesus being there. And so you don't have to wait till Acts 2 to see the disciples carrying out the ministry of Jesus. It's already happening here in Mark chapter 6. They preach like him. They have the same message as him. They preach repentance like Jesus. They even cast out many demons and heal the sick. Notice this casting out demons, because that'll come up later in the Gospel of Mark when they're unable to cast out a demon. And you just have to ask what happened between chapter 6 and I believe it's chapter 9, where they are unable to cast out a demon. And Jesus rebukes them because of that. So it's interesting to see what's going on, what happens in between. So now we're going to see Jesus sending out the 12, as we just read about. There's going to be the death of John, and then there will be the return of the 12. So the death of John the Baptist is between this sandwich section of Jesus sending out the 12 and the returning of the 12. When King Herod heard of Jesus, because his name had become well recognized, Herod said, "This is John the Immerser risen from the dead, and this is why these powerful works are produced in him." Others said, "He is Elijah." Still others, "He is a prophet like one of the prophets of long ago." And this introduces a theme, or continues a theme, that'll be brought up time and time again, especially in the Transfiguration, that Jesus is like Elijah or he's like one of the prophets. So Mark definitely sounds the bell for Jesus being the Son of God. Jesus himself uses Son of Man as a title to refer to himself quite often, but also Jesus is a prophet. And we should never forget the prophetic nature of Jesus and his ministry. And as Jesus was a prophet, so the church today should be prophetic. If we're going to be like Jesus and continue the ministry of Jesus, we need to speak out as prophets. Now, verse 16. But when Herod heard this, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, has risen." So he thought he was John the Baptist, which really continues on with the prophetic tradition. Herod had sent for John to be arrested and shut him in prison. He did this because of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, whom he had married. So he took Philip's wife as his own wife, which was against the Jewish law. For John had said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to be married to your brother's wife." So Herodias had a grudge against John and wished to kill him, but she was not able to carry out her wish. Herod feared John, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he listened to John, he was very perplexed, but he enjoyed listening to him. Finally, an opportune day arrived. Herod gave a banquet to celebrate his own birthday, which really wasn't done in that day and time. They didn't celebrate birthdays, and for him to celebrate his own birthday definitely wasn't done amongst the Jews. He invited a person of high rank, military leaders, and prominent citizens of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias entered, she began dancing. Her dancing pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, "Ask me whatever you wish, and it will be given to you." He swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give to you, up to half my kingdom." The girl went and said to her mother, "What shall I request?" Her mother replied, "The head of John the Immerser." Immediately the girl hurried to give her request to the king. She said, I wish for you to give me at once the head of John the Immerser on a platter. She added on a platter. Her mother didn't say that. She added that. And, you have to wonder here. I mean, obviously, Herodias wanted John dead. You have to wonder if the girl really thought through it or not. Herod offered her half his kingdom. Instead, she gets the head of John the Baptist. That doesn't seem like a good choice when you offered half the kingdom, but it shows the grudge that Herodias held toward John the Baptist. And you have to wonder, if she had said half the kingdom, would Herod have come through with that? Anyway, just things to think about. The king grew very sad, yet because of his oath and his dinner guest, he could not refuse her request. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded him to return with John's head. The executioner went and beheaded John in prison. He returned with John's head on a platter. He gave it to the girl, and the girl presented it to her mother. When John's apprentices heard about this, they came and took away his body and placed it in the tomb. And so you have the narrative here of what happens to John the Baptist. Boltz writes, Mark presents us a strong picture of life outside the reign and rule of God, under the fallen and under those who resist the full reign of God among men. And it's true. That's a good picture of that there. So next we go to the return of the 12. The apostles assembled together with Jesus and reported, this is verse 30, and reported to him everything they had done and taught. Jesus said to them, come away into a quiet place and rest for a while. For so many people were coming and going that they did not have an opportunity to eat. So they left in a boat in a secluded place to be alone. And we started with the disciples going out to preach. Then we had the story of John the Baptist. And perhaps what is going on there is that Mark is including that John the Baptist between the story of them going to preach and coming back with the success story about what had happened in their preaching, and the story of John the Baptist in the middle to say, you know what, it's not always going to be a successful story when you preach. It's not always going to be easy. And you're not always going to have a great reaction from people. And so just be aware of that, because you're following the path of a prophet. And prophets, their lives usually don't end that well, being prophetic the way that they are. But notice that what Jesus does when they do return is he takes them away to a quiet place to rest for a while. And I think that's one of the things that's often overmissed as we read this story, that he actually wants them to be alone, wants them to rest, and has that intention of them resting there. Unfortunately, sometimes our great intentions, we're not able to follow through on them, because what happens next is the feeding of the 5,000 men. Verse 33, the people saw them leaving, and many recognized who they were. They ran together by foot from all the towns and arrived before them. So they're going off to rest, and the people notice them going off, and they notice the direction that they're going in, and they get there before them, and they're waiting. 5,000 men, which including women, and if their families there with, children, then could be at least 10,000, probably 15, 20,000 people there waiting for Jesus. When Jesus got out of the boat, he saw the large crowd and had compassion, one of my favorite Greek words, splanknizomai, to be moved inside so much that you do something. He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Notice he has compassion, and he doesn't just heal. He has compassion, and he doesn't just feed them. He has compassion, and he teaches them, because people need to be taught about life and how to be and how to grow and how to mature, and teaching is important. Jesus, as a teacher, recognized the importance of teaching, and so he taught them. It was now late in the day, and the apprentices came to him, saying, This is a secluded place, and the time is already late. Send the people away so that they might go to the nearby farms and villages to purchase something to eat." Jesus answered them, "You give them something to eat." I love that. They come with a problem. They need something to eat. And Jesus says, well, you fix it. You do something about it. You get them something to eat. And then they replied, "Should we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give it to them to eat?" And that's often what comes back. You go do something about it. Well, then we'll give us some funds. Give us some money. Go in the treasury and give us some funds. But Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, he says, how much bread do you have? Go and see. Before you get any funds out of the treasury, look at your resources. See what you have. And I love the way that Jesus takes care of this situation. They discovered how much food was there. They reported 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus commanded all the people to sit down group by group on the green grass. They sat in groups of hundreds and fifties. Jesus took the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Looking up to heaven, he blessed it, and he broke the bread and gave it to his apprentices so that they might set it before the people. He also distributed the 2 fish to everyone. Everyone ate and was satisfied. And that's a huge part of the story. You have all these people that are hungry. There's 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. They eat, but not only do they eat, but they're satisfied. Jesus satisfies us in our lives. That's not prosperity theology. It doesn't mean that he's going to give us everything that we ever have wished for. That doesn't happen. But he will satisfy us spiritually if we follow him. And then the apprentices picked up 12 full baskets of broken pieces of bread and also a fish. The word that's used for basket is the smaller Jewish basket. There's 12. And so you had these 12 apostles going to Jesus. We got a problem and we don't know how to fix it. These people are hungry and we don't have any food. Jesus says, take care of it. Well, can we have some funds? We can go and buy something. And he's like, no, go see what you've got. They do. They go and see what they got. And when they finish, they not only have satisfied all the people, each of them is holding a basket. So each of them has to look down at the bread and realize, oh man, I did not see this coming. I did not see that Jesus was going to do this. And this is fantastic. Look at what Jesus has done. But that image of the bread and yeast will be used in story after story after story after this, because they should have, with the smell of that bread and that bread just sitting in front of them, they should have realized at that point, plus everything else that's happened before, but they should now realize for sure Jesus is the real deal, and Jesus is able to do anything. But unfortunately, they forget that and don't gain insight from it. So it says 43, the apprentices picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces, bread, and also a fish, and there were 5,000 men with their families who ate the bread. So it's 5,000 plus. This is the only miracle that's actually recorded in all 4 Gospels. And it's a fantastic story that shows us that Jesus satisfies people. It's an amazing event. Now let's close out the chapter and we'll look a little more here. We'll look at Jesus walking on the water. Another fantastic miracle of Jesus. Immediately, the apprentices pressed him to embark in the boat and to go to the other side of the lake to Bethsaida. Bethsaida is the Jewish fishing village and is part of the evangelical triangle of Bethsaida, Chorazin, and Capernaum, where Jesus spent most of his time during his ministry. Jesus dismissed the crowd, saying goodbye to them. Jesus went to the mountain to pray. And so he goes off to spend time by himself in prayer. And here's another instance of Jesus getting off by himself, getting off alone, this time going off by himself to pray. So he wasn't just with crowds all the time, and he wasn't with his disciples all the time. He got time to be with God, got time to be by himself. And there's many situations or many instances where we see that happening. Late that night, the little boat was in the middle of the lake. Jesus was alone on the shore. Jesus saw them straining at rowing the boat because there was an opposing wind. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Jesus went toward them, walking on the lake. He intended to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the lake, they thought it was a ghost. They cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." He got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And so, again, we see Jesus having power over nature. They see him walking by, and they think it's a ghost. But notice what Jesus does there. He tries to dispel their fear. Take courage, it's I, don't be afraid. We all hear ghost stories, or have heard ghost stories. I grew up listening. I had a friend, and his dad, his name was J.K., used to tell the most terrifying stories. It just scared us to death. But I was reading and doing some research here, and one of the stories that happened around the Sea of Galilee was that there was a rabbi who his apprentice looked at him and said, "Oh, Rabbi, what are those lights out on the water?" And the rabbi said, "Oh, those aren't lights. Those are the eyes of the Leviathan." And I thought, no wonder they're scared. They hear stories like that about being around the Sea of Galilee at night. That would keep me awake, and would keep me looking off into the horizon for any type of visible light. But here, Jesus, and it's interesting, he's going to just pass them by. That seems like that's maybe a reference to God with Moses or God with Elijah. But the boat, he gets into the boat, and when he does, the wind ceases. So he stills the storm. They were greatly astonished, but notice this, and I think this is what this story is driving at, is they were greatly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the episode of the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. That's so sad to me. Such a sad note to close out on, that just before this, they'd been sitting with a loaf in each hand, 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and they didn't get anything from that. They didn't gain any insight from that. And so I said bread would keep popping up. It pops up now in this story, that they didn't gain any insight from that bread. And so when Jesus was there, they were just astonished that he could calm the sea when he'd already done it before, and he'd already done so many miracles. But it just shows that the disciples don't really get who Jesus is. Now look at 53. This is a long chapter. So we're going to look next at Jesus healing the sick in Gennesaret. Crossing over, they came to the shore at Gennesaret and anchored there. When Jesus got out of the boat, the people there immediately recognized him. You see Jesus and the disciples just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on the Sea of Galilee. They ran about the whole region and began to carry on their pallets those who were sick. They carried them to the place where they had heard he was staying. When he entered a village, town, or farm, the people would bring the sick out to the marketplace so that they might touch the edge of his garment. All who touched him were healed. And so it just is another one of the miracle stories showing Jesus able to do fantastic miracles in these villages. And it helps demonstrate that Jesus is the Son of God, which is the point of all of these miracles, really, is that Jesus has fantastic power because he's God's Son. So the question that I want you to end this chapter with is going back up to the disciples who hold the bread in their hand but gain no insight from it. We have an opportunity to learn from the Word of God right now. In a sense, we're holding the bread in our hand, and Jesus is right there. We get to see things about him that it says in Luke that prophets and kings long to look into, but we get to see them, and we're gifted in that way. What insight are we going to gain? Even today, what insight will you gain from this passage of Scripture here today? I hope that all of us will really reflect on the life of Jesus and gain insight from his life. Thank you.